Well, hello, and thank you so much for joining us today for COVID-19 and your capital campaign, What Now? I am Christina McPhillips, and I will be your moderator for this webinar. I'm with Carl Bloom Associates. A few quick housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded, and it will be made available to you after the conclusion of the webinar. You're all muted, but I really want to stress that your thoughts and questions are very important to us, and we want to hear from you. So please chat your questions to us in the question box, and we will attempt to answer them on this webinar. You can ask anything you like. We won't say your name. We'll just answer your question. If you have strategies you're currently using, please chat those to us too. And I also want to say that today's presentation will run a little bit more like a podcast in that there will be dialogue, but really not many visuals. So with that, as we all know, this is an extraordinary and uncertain time. And if you're running a capital campaign or thinking of running one in the future, you're likely asking yourself, where do we go from here? And over the last 3 weeks, we at Carl Bloom Associates, we've had dozens of conversations, emergency conversations with our nonprofit clients, and we've talked about their direct mail and their digital campaigns, and adjustments have been very easily able to be made to those, and they reflect, week by week changes and things like that that we're seeing as the fundraising environment really adjusts to the world and everything going on. But beyond direct mail, some of the nonprofits that we work with are running capital campaigns. And so that inspired us to reach out to our partners at campaigncouncil.org to get their opinions of what we should all be doing if we are running a capital campaign or thinking of one or a feasibility study. It's a very confusing time. And the conversations that we had with Kevin and Carlyn and their team at campaigncouncil.org led us to offer you this webinar today. So with that, let me introduce you to our speakers. We have Kevin, who is the president, Kevin Wallace, who's the president of campaigncouncil.org, and he's been helping nonprofits plan for and manage capital campaigns since 2003. And then we have Carlyn Runnels. She is the consultant systems and information director, and she's a fundraising professional who's based in Montana. And she's worked in annual and major giving fundraising at 2 large universities, and she's been a consultant on capital campaign strategies with campaigncouncil.org for 2 years. And then it's great for us to talk to the experts, but we really wanted to bring in one of your peers, another nonprofit. So we have Jennifer Harris on the line with us today, and she's the Director of Advancement at Salpointe Catholic High School in Tucson, Arizona. And she's currently working to finish the final $1 million of a $10 million capital campaign. And so with that, I'm going to kick us off by asking Kevin and Carlyn, as professionals, capital campaign professionals, what are you hearing from the nonprofits that you're working with? Tell us a little bit about what's going on out there.
Thanks. I appreciate that, and we're thrilled to be speaking with you, Christina, and your colleagues at Carl Bloom, but also a lot of your clients. And I hope the information that we're able to provide is helpful and insightful. And with our company, who works with nonprofits of all different varieties around the country, we have clients that are starting campaigns, in the middle of campaigns, wrapping up their campaigns like Jennifer is at Salpointe, and then also other clients that are beginning needs assessments, they're beginning feasibility studies, and or they're considering one of those two. The individuals that are the clients that are in capital campaigns, we're moving forward with them. Their missions and their visions have not changed. And then with clients that are in feasibilities or considering feasibility studies, it's more of a case-by-case basis. We're taking a little time, we're checking the pulse of these communities and seeing how best we can move forward.
Okay. Carlyn, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, we'll get into a lot of the details later, but it's basically breaking down into if it's a human service organization that is having a direct impact on survival right now, basically, or if it's kind of a lifestyle campaign. So we'll hash out those details as we get a little further into this, Christina.
Okay, sounds good. Jennifer, as a nonprofit, what are you thinking? What are you seeing? What are you hearing?
So fortunately, we have not received any negative feedback or pullback among any of our existing donors. There doesn't seem at this point to be any real risk of going backward in our campaign, which we're grateful for. We are putting a pause on soliciting new campaign gifts for the moment. And that pause is not no action by any means. It's filled with action. We are still communicating with all of our constituents. We are still in the sort of the quiet phase of our campaign. And so we maintain contact with all of those potential donors through newsletters and periodic updates. We're really, really trying to keep all those folks engaged at Salpointe to make sure that they understand that we are still offering the same wonderful education to our students and to our community. I really, really want to make sure that we have a very tight-knit community among our families and alumni, and it's important to maintain that sense of centrality in people's lives, I think. And so we're working very hard just to do what we do, and that is embrace our community, be a pillar of strength in a time of uncertainty, keep people informed and excited about what we do here on this campus, make sure that they know that while we're hitting the pause button at $9 million, we do have $1 million more to raise. And we've been very clear that when the world situation improves, we look forward to talking to them more about hitting that milestone. One of the things that we have done genuinely very much from the heart, but it has the wonderful benefit of showing our community our value and how we care for one another is I have started a mutual aid community out of my advancement office. And so essentially we're hooking up people who have requests for need, whether that's household bills or tuition assistance or whatever sort of stressful debt people are looking at as their income diminishes. And we are matching them with donors who want to help someone else in the community. And so the response to that has been very, very positive. It's given us a very positive way to connect with the community and a positive way to have some impact here while we pause on the greater campaign. And then I'm very hopeful that once things are back to normal, that we will finish this campaign successfully. I feel very optimistic about it at this point. It is for a new Center for the Arts, so it is curriculum-based, and I think it's going to bring tremendous value to our campus, and people can actually see it. The facility is very far along in the construction phase, and so I think that's helping us as well. It helps generate excitement. So that's where I'm sitting right now. Lots and lots of communication, not really any direct asking.
Okay. And, I'd like to say two things to our audience. One, can you please go to the question box and let us know, quick little note, are you currently running a capital campaign, a feasibility study? Are you considering one? Where are you? We can tailor the conversation today to some of your questions and kind of where you are in your own process. And then given everything that Jen just said, communicating the value and the things that you're doing for the community is so very important right now. So I want to say that's what we are telling a lot of the nonprofits we work with in their direct mail and email communications, to continue to offer things to the community and tell the community about it. So it sounds like in general, for whether you're doing a capital campaign or some kind of other fundraising, you really just want to constantly be saying, here are the wonderful things that we're doing for the community. And then the asking really kind of comes later on. Kevin and Carlyn, I want to go back to you for a moment. And again, everybody, please do send us your questions. So big question, are some nonprofits starting feasibility studies right now?
Yeah, Christina, I alluded that I'd be sharing more about this. So yes, if the nonprofit has a direct impact on populations that are being affected, then those groups do seem to be starting those feasibility studies. As Kevin mentioned earlier, their missions and their visions haven't changed. The things that inspired us yesterday are still inspiring us today. So if that project has a direct impact on the populations that improves quality of life, then some of those groups are indeed starting feasibility studies. We're working with a group down in Arizona that is trying to expand its food bank services. And what a more perfect time to be making the case to your community, and like you just said, Christina, communicating your value. So that human service organization is definitely still moving forward with its campaign and its feasibility study. Another example, and we don't have a client that falls within these parameters, but absolutely those larger nonprofits that have super loyal donors can definitely still be raising that capital in their communities because they're trusted, or even on a national scale because of the perceived value that they have to society. The bottom line, though, if these groups are starting feasibility studies, just depends on the niche that's being served. So asking yourself, is our niche necessary to address right now? Everyone has so much on their minds. Is this the right time to be communicating this? Maybe that niche is more of a lifestyle improvement and isn't critical to safety or survival. If that's the case, then a lot of those groups don't seem to be moving forward quite with as much gusto as they would have before in terms of starting a feasibility study. But I do want to say, I know that all nonprofits, regardless of their perceived need in society, given this current situation, are strapped right now. So I really don't want to belittle everybody's tight situation, whether or not you are a lifestyle nonprofit or a food bank, So in terms of the donor prospect perception, we're just finding that the groups and nonprofits that are moving forward with the planned feasibility study are indeed those ones that are making a direct impact on someone's daily survival right now.
Understood. Kevin, what are your thoughts?
One of the interesting things that we're finding, and again, so we used to get on a lot of airplanes and drive in cars and visit different states, and of course all of that has come to an abrupt halt, and our clients are really craving interaction with us. So whether it's a school or a hospital or a food bank or a library or an arts center, they want to talk to us to say, hey, what's going on? What do you think we should be doing? And they just want to talk, period. They just want to get things off their chest. They want some comforting and maybe a few answers that are real, because all of us right now are going through this anxiety of what's going to come tomorrow and which direction am I going to have to head, and nonprofits are all going through a lot of unknown, and so whatever known factors we can provide for them, it's very helpful. And then that moves forward to the nonprofits clientele, the nonprofits donors. They want to hear what's going on and how are we addressing this? Can we address this? Can we get out and reach these populations that desperately need our help? So with regard to feasibility studies, we're just really spending a lot more time listening to our clients, because honestly, Christina, some of them just don't have the heart right now to get into a capital campaign planning process. They are either too consumed with providing services, just day-to-day services if they're a food bank, or trying to get over the hump of inquiring about whether or not their constituency cares about building a new library, that there's just a lot of, I want to say hand-holding, but just consoling and saying, it's all right, as soon as you've got the spirit, let's get out there and do it. So we're doing a lot of very careful listening to where their heart is. And yeah, we can push any sort of mission and say, no, it's terribly important now, you got to go. But if their heart's not in it, their heart's not in it. And we've really got to respect that.
Wonderful. And if I may prompt you guys with a question that is coming from the audience, but I'll give you some time to think about it, and then we'll answer it towards the end of this conversation. We have someone asking, how would you advise incorporating the universal tax break into the stimulus package into messaging to donors? So don't worry about answering that right now. Think about it. We'll answer it and coming up. Another question.
I'll call my tax consultant really quick while on another line and see how that goes.
Yeah. Yes, for sure. Phone a friend. And then I wanted to say that we probably have just now had about 15 people write in and say that they are in various stages of a capital campaign with just completing a feasibility study and some are in the middle of a $70 million capital campaign, quarter of the way through, says another group. Another one is talking about they represent an association. They are part of an association that represents the hospitality industry and does training and education. So everybody on the phone today sounds like they are your peers and in the same boat as you. So let's continue down with some additional questions for our speakers. Okay, so now that we've talked about feasibility studies, let's talk about what's happening with nonprofits that are in a capital campaign. Jen, I know you talked a little bit before, but can you expand on what you're doing currently or not doing?
Yeah, really. Yes, I certainly can. So one of the things, obviously, that we all face as nonprofits that rely on charitable giving is, we run a pretty tight margin typically. And so trying to make sure that we focus on solvency, and in our case, that's going to be tuition. And that means that we need to keep enrollment up. And it's very challenging in times of financial distress to convince some people that private education is something that they need to prioritize. I think people really understand the value of it, but when push comes to shove and you're having difficulty paying your bills, there's a lot of things that have the potential to go by the wayside. And so we are focusing on sort of those foundational things as well. How do we make sure that we have appropriate enrollment so that our income for next year is healthy and strong and keeps us up and running so that we have a capital campaign to continue. And so, I transfer some of my more ambitious goals for the future into a little bit of maintenance goals for the moment. And a lot of those same people who are our major gift donors are the very same people who have just a tremendous investment in this place. And they certainly are very, very committed to our success and our future. And so, keeping those people informed, as I said before, about the capital campaign is important, but it's also very important just to let them know that we are here and their support is vital for our ongoing regular daily operations. And so, even though we have put a pause on these large asks, we're looking at a list of hundreds of people who have committed to make a gift to our campaign, who are committed to our future. And so, again, just communication. Keeping those people engaged, letting them know that we're good stewards of their money, that we're working very hard to serve the population that they care so deeply about, and maintaining that status as one of their trusted nonprofits in their life, that not only do they want to support when we're doing something like campaign giving, but they want to support us through the lean times as well. And so, and in addition to that, we have the opportunity to build a sense of affinity. I think we have an opportunity to demonstrate our strengths, our willingness to be flexible, our understanding of the community needs. And I think that's going to go a long way in terms of how do people evaluate our ask when we do go public with this campaign. And we have been a critical part of their lives and an organization that has very wisely stewarded their money and managed our mission and continue to do the good work that we do so that we seem like a really strong investment when we're asking for that kind of large investment from our constituency.
Okay. And Carlyn, what do you think?
Yeah, so Jen said communication. I will say listening. So these nonprofits that are in capital campaigns are doing a lot of listening before they're communicating. I actually listened to another webinar a couple weeks ago, and one of the presenters described what she called athletic listening. And this really resonated with me and with us as a company as we've been strategically advising our clients on how to go forward if they are in capital campaigns. As humans, we have the tendency to try to come up with our response or our next question while someone's talking. But when you use athletic listening, it requires us to turn off that tendency and deeply listen to that person. So maybe they're a client of your nonprofit or a prospective donor. So really listening to what that person's telling you. So with that said, those nonprofits that are in capital campaigns are moving forward mostly if they fall within those human service needs that we've already described. those nonprofit leaders are using that athletic listening to stay in touch with those cultivated donor prospects and hear how they're coping with all of this, and then designing the communication strategy from there. So just deciding if their concerns align with the project, and then either making an ask or continuing to provide that moral support. We have a client in Central Washington that is building a cancer treatment center, a radiation treatment center, and they're moving forward with athletic listening, partially because many of those donor prospects are actually cancer survivors. So they really understand how frightening it can be to be getting treatments that weaken your immune system. And combining that with a global pandemic is a really scary situation. So that client is just really listening deeply and making a strategy for each prospect on a case-by-case basis. Kevin, what do you have to add to that?
Yeah, one of the other things that we're seeing with, and Jen touched on it a little bit with regard to her campaign, they're focusing on, just making some closures and keeping their donors aware of everything that's going on, and then refocusing some of their efforts on making sure that their own community is remaining as financially solvent as possible. And something that's a little bit more human service oriented. We have a client that's probably about 70% of their goal is raised to build a brand new food bank. And they've been doing really well with their campaign and starting to talk about, all right, how are we going to wrap this up? What are going to be the last gifts that we end up getting us over the top? And then the coronavirus hit. And because they're a food bank, and because they're a relatively rural food bank, there was a huge outcry among the school districts for food for their kids, because their kids were going home over the weekend. This was when school was still in session, obviously, and the families didn't have any food. So this has always been a problem. There's been backpack programs within food banks for decades, but this nonprofit, this food bank, heard such an outcry for this service that they stopped actively fundraising for their capital campaign because they had an immediate operational need to support probably about a 300% growth in their backpack program. So they got on the radio, they got on the television, they had newspaper articles run, and they did a lot of emailing saying, hey, we know that we've been doing this capital campaign project. We're going to come back to this, but right now, what we really need is your support for backpack programs. Kids are going home hungry, and since the schools have closed, they've just started distributing the backpacks to the empty school campuses where kids are coming and picking them up through different means. But what we like about this approach a lot is that it's keeping our food bank clients engaged in the fundraising process. They have said the campaign is important, but it's not as important as keeping these families fed. So let's pivot a little bit. And what we believe is going to happen is, in the long term, these donors that have given to them through backpacks are going to be prospective donors for the capital campaign. And there are a lot of them that are new. And the people who are donors who are in closure, so they've been solicited but haven't made a gift, they're going to feel so good about what this food bank has done for the community that they're going to be more inspired to get to them than before. That's a really neat story of how somebody has said, you know what, there's something more important for us to be doing right now. We'll come back to this. And in the end, I think it's going to have a hugely positive impact on their image in the community.
That's a great story. Kevin, I really love that one. Thanks for sharing that with us. And I think you're so right. Excellent story. If I may, there are a couple of questions that have come in. One, Kevin and Carlyn, do you have any tips for board members who are getting cold feet about the capital campaign, thinking that they need to stop everything having to do with the capital campaign and wait to see what the world is going to look like in a few months? What's your advice?
Yeah, that's such a great question, because of course those of us that were doing this back in 2008 and 2009, we faced this question almost every single month for 6 or 8 months when we would go in and visit with our clients, and people saying, really, is this the time that we should be doing this? And these are obviously two different events, but the bottom line is that is this the right environment to be asking people for money when so many people are worried about their health, about their jobs, about their security? And we've got what we learned during that time, and what we're also moving forward with right now is, number one, your boards are concerned and your boards want to help. And all of us as just humans, when we're feeling a little bit lost and we don't know what to do, sometimes we're going to clam up and just try and take care of our own business and shut everybody else out. That's a bad response to it all, because deep down we all know that the best way to get through this is to keep pushing forward and to try and help others that are in greater need. If your capital campaign has a vision and a mission to genuinely help others that are in need, and if that mission and vision has not changed, then why would you stop? Nothing on the horizon looks different for the homeless, for the financially insecure, for the food insecure, for those suffering from cancer, from those lacking contact in their community because they're shut-ins. All of that remains the same and has perhaps even gotten worse. So for goodness sake, don't stop trying to raise your capital if you've got the heart to do it. But what you have to do is you have to take another look at, who am I raising capital from? As Jen said, their campaign is wrapping up. They've done a great job. They're at the $9 million mark. They're going to go public. They're going to engage with everybody that's ever loved or cared about that school to give to it. So they're going to finish off with getting $5,000 gifts, $10,000 gifts, $500 gifts, etc. But she knows instinctively that now's not the time to be asking for $5,000 gifts or $1,000 gifts. Those people are typically hurting. They don't have that disposable income right now. And in Jen's case, they've already made and closed the majority of their high 5, 6-figure, 7-figure gifts. That's all done with. Now, in another scenario, though, if the campaign is not so far along and there are a whole bunch of high wealth prospects out there, why wouldn't you engage with them? Yes, their wealth has changed, but their philanthropy hasn't. And their wealth change is a percentage of, and you know, when I get a 10% loss in my income, I feel it. But when the wealthy philanthropist gets a 10% loss in her income, she doesn't feel it to the same degree. And that's just a numbers game. So what we try and get our boards to focus on is saying, what we need to do is we need to segment our audience a little bit and really focus on the individuals and corporations and foundations that are financially secure because of the amount of wealth that they have. And if you get the boards to look at it that way, oftentimes you will find that that they'll come along. And let me just throw one more thing in here real quickly, Christina, is in our experience, doesn't matter how great your board is, really only about a third of them are going to actively participate with you in the capital campaign. And the rest of them are going to nod and wave and smile at you and say, okay, go get them. I'm 100% behind you. And or they might not really be that into fundraising. So also just be realistic with yourselves when you're listening to your boards talk and say, you know, is this person genuinely been supportive of the campaign from the get-go? Have they been on the sidelines and now they're just deflecting, or do they really just genuinely, they're not a fundraiser, they're into governance, or they're into special events, or they're into something else, and they're just kind of expressing their overall displeasure with the process. So you've also got to ask yourself that deeper question.
And I just build on that too, to reflect on your why. So as the nonprofit leader, you need your board members to be supportive of you, especially during these challenging times. And it's so easy to get bogged down with why we shouldn't be going forward with something like this, given the current situation. But I would encourage you as the nonprofit leader to go back to the early phases of when you started your campaign, and when everyone, even if they're the board member that doesn't typically get behind things, when everyone was excited about what the future of your organization looked like. So just kind of tap back into why you started this and what the impact of your campaign will be on the constituents of your nonprofit, and get that back in front of them, because that will dust off the inspiration that you all felt and can help realign with the bigger vision of what you're trying to do outside of the day-to-day hard news that we're all reading.
Okay, and 60 seconds to answer, speed round. An additional question that was just asked. Someone says, we are actively rebuilding our board in preparation for future major gifts. Do you think now is a good time to recruit or approach potential board members? Speed round.
Yes.
I think now might be the very best time, because you're going to get the people who have a certain level of ease and enjoyment of fundraising. Anybody who's even nervous about it will be completely scared off at this point.
And anyone who's really passionate about your organization is also going to raise their hand and say, yeah, you matter now, and I'm on board with joining. So yeah, I would agree.
Okay, good. Okay, two more very important questions have come in. Jen, I think this one is kind of for you, but to the other nonprofits on the phone that are not education, I think that this will still resonate with you about who in your organization is sending out the communications, and are there any roadblocks at the moment? So the question is, as an independent school who has put a pause on a campaign, how do we in advancement keep communication with families when it is currently faculty and head of school doing the main communications? What can advancement do beyond, I hope you're okay, and just checking in? So when you have a roadblock to the communication, how do you get the word out?
Well, as I mentioned, we have a campaign newsletter, which is, something that Kevin is great about doing, and making sure that we stay up on that kind of communication. And so that provides a really nice vehicle for not just a direct communication from our president, but also for other bits of information to get out as well. And then second to that, I think that varying the kind of communication that you're sending out, we're focusing quite hard on making sure that on the one hand, we are talking about the things that we're doing to alleviate the effects of this crisis, but at the same time sharing lots of positive information about what's going on. And that information is coming from all different facets of the nonprofit. So you have people that are directly engaged in different elements of what we do. And so we're sharing all that information. So even though it's coming from a single source, it has a lot of different voices delivering the message at the same time. Although I will say that as the director of advancement, I certainly am not the face of the organization at this point. I'm very fortunate that I have a president who is a wonderful communicator, and people look to her for guidance and leadership. And so she really is our delivery agent for just about everything at this juncture.
Okay, great. So another question that I think is important, and I think a lot of people are wondering this, to our panel, what do you think or feel the life cycle of nonprofits is for restarting feasibility studies, campaigns, annual capital endowment in the Western U.S.? And so this is after the lockdown is lifted, after things start to dissipate. How quickly do you think things will get up and running? What's appropriate?
Can I jump in for just one sec? I was going to add one thing earlier. One of the things that we're doing that's going to hope that we jumpstart the capital campaign again is we're trying to have a more flexible horizon for payment. So typically we have, start your obligation now. You've made your pledge. You have 5 years to pay it off. We've arranged for our financing such that we can push that horizon out. Someone can say, I'm ready to commit today, but I can't start paying you until 2022. And I think that flexibility has been helpful.
Okay, perfect. Great.
And
Go ahead,
come
Kevin.
back around, Christina, to the question about when is the appropriate time, what is the horizon on all of that, and And obviously it's all speculation on our part, but having worked in the industry for so long, I want everyone who's taking the time to listen to this to really take heed in the athletic listening portion of it, to engage with, and I was talking to Jen about this the other day about, is her day crazier now than ever? Does she have more time on her hands than before? And without all the kids around and without 17 distractions going on a day, she's actually finding it easier to focus on stewardship than just the day-to-day things. And when we say stewardship, we mean, picking up the phone, talking to your people who are your longtime loyal donors and saying, hey, how are things going? How are you doing? Those of you that are thinking about doing a feasibility study and you're not overwrought with having to distribute personal protective equipment to your constituency, take this time to pick up the phone and to check in with your people who have major organizations successful in the past and get their temperature. They're going to be able to tell you much more so as to what your prospects of going into a feasibility study would be. And let me give you just two real simple examples. You're in a small community and you run a library, and your longtime donor who has essentially given you, half of your income over the years, call her up and see where she is and when she feels is going to be a good time moving forward. Because quite frankly, unless she's on board, you're not going to get anywhere with your feasibility study anyhow. And then the other one is, if you're a nationwide organization, if you're pulling funds from a variety of sources, and particularly with foundations, pick up the phone and talk to those foundations. Make sure that they're not pivoting away from your programmatic or your capital support, and that you're still going to be able to fit in with what they're going to be focusing in the near future.
Okay, good point. And well, one of the things that to the panel that we've talked about a lot is that listening is key. Carlyn, I think you have some thoughts about what nonprofits should do when planning or managing a capital campaign, kind of beyond listening.
Yep, absolutely. I am a big data nerd, so I propose that you look at your data and do some data management and analysis. And I'll kind of break this into a few ways that can be helpful if you're planning or managing a capital campaign. So for one, you can definitely take this time to clean up or optimize the data itself. So if you're a smaller nonprofit, I would hazard a guess that you don't have a staff member who is dedicated to your data management. And I'll come back to this again later. I don't want to be saying that you have more time on your hands now, so now's the perfect time to look at your data, because I know that while you may have less of your normal tasks going on right now, things are so crazy and almost 3-5 times as stressful as they usually are. So they're mentally taxing. So I'm definitely not suggesting that you use all your free time to start cleaning up your data, because for most people, that's like the least fun part about managing a nonprofit, right? But if you do have the extra time to take a look at the data itself, now's a good time to do it. Maybe you have the time to clean up those missing addresses that you've been looking at in your Excel data or in your database management every time you do a mail merge. So you've got a little bit of extra time perhaps to take a look at those. But regardless of your database setup, you can also research your top donors to see what other causes they're supporting and at what levels. And that doesn't even have to be anything other than a Google search. So just reconnecting and taking a deeper look at some of the people that maybe don't come to the top of mind every time you're thinking about your donor prospects. A second one is any kind of wealth screening if you have access to that. So beyond the data cleanup, you can also start to prepare and lay out the strategies that will help you once this passes. And this kind of ties into one of the previous questions that you asked, Christina. No one wishes they had a crystal ball more than us at this time. We all wish we knew when this was going to end, so we knew when we could start again. But unfortunately, we don't have that tool. So if you're able to create any strategies that are data focused that you'll be able to implement as soon as you're able to ramp up once this passes, and it will pass. That might be helpful too. So if you have wealth screening accessible to you, then you can identify maybe some sleeper top prospects that you didn't know had as much cash or wealth as they do have, to potentially either ask for support now or even just prepare your strategy for how you're going to start to cultivate them once this all moves through. But at the same time, you can also use some other segmenting strategies using the data that you already have, like the past donor giving history or age groupings, to make a communication and ask strategy that, again, you can implement as soon as all this passes in a few months. And again, these are all just supplemental steps that you can take, definitely not super necessary, but if you do find that you have some extra time and brain space to work through these data steps, it's a good time if you have the ability to do it. But I know you all have so much happening right now, so I do just, of course, want to thank you for what you are doing and hope that you're staying sane in the process.
That was very sweet. Thanks, Carlyn. And as a fellow data nerd, I hear you. It seems like a great time to dig deep in if you can. So to our team, our panel that's talking right now, we have 2 more questions, and then I want to give you just a moment to wrap up, and then we're going to say goodbye. I know that there are additional questions that are still coming in, but we can have the folks at campaignCouncil.org shoot you an email to answer your question. One person did say, is it athletic listening or authentic listening? Authentic listening sounds like what it would be, but it is actually athletic listening, like sports or sports, the things that are not on TV right now. So athletic listening. Carlyn, could you say one more time what that was? It sounds like it was very interesting to the audience.
Right, yeah, athletic listening is what that other webinar panelist called it. And I've just commandeered it because I think it's so great, because you have to use a lot of energy when you're doing sports, right? I assume, I'm not a sporty person, but you're using that energy, you're really focused, and you are engaging on a really deep level with that athletic listening. So, I mean, even now in this webinar, right, I'm listening to what my other fellow panelists are saying, but I'm trying to absorb some pieces and then craft a way that I can combine things that they've said into my responses. And technically, that's not athletic listening, because I'm not fully listening to all of their sentences and just hearing them out. I'm working towards my own response. When you're doing athletic listening, you're really just there in the moment and you're engaging with that person and hearing how they are actually feeling about this current situation. And once you've absorbed that, then you can go forward with your own motives or intentions with that conversation, only if it's a fitting response. So I think authentic listening is also a wonderful way to describe it, but this person had said athletic listening, and that just, it gives me this visual of like a rugby player that's there just braced for whatever is coming at them, and then they're having the athletic listening response there.
Right.
Christina, can I build on just for
Mm-hmm.
real quick? And as fundraisers, we all want to get to our ask. You know, we're building up for that. Would you sponsor our event? Would you interview with our consultants? Would you make a pledge? That's where we're trying to get in 80% of the conversations that we're having. So we're looking for the opening, we're waiting for the right time, we're watching the body language, we're waiting to pounce always. And that's our job. And that's our job, is to help our clients get to that point. And Carlyn's point with the athletic listening is take that off the table for a little bit and focus on understanding where these people are. So your end point is not an ask right now. Your end point is understanding where the individual's concerns rest and whether or not those genuine concerns align in some way or another with the services that your nonprofit provides.
Okay, thank you. And Kevin, I almost feel like the whole athletic listening has maybe become the theme or the summary of everything that we're talking about today. Just taking a moment to pause and really listen, and then we'll get back to asking in the future. Carlyn, I'm so glad you brought that up. There is a question that I think is definitely a difficult question, and it borders on the, do you have the crystal ball? Somebody says that, of course, while the crisis will pass, do you think kind of like the scars of the invisible enemy will linger into the future? And I think what this person is really asking is, we all know that the forecast is that the virus will likely dissipate a bit during the summer and then come back in the fall and winter. How do we move through the next year with the waves that we're going to experience? I know you don't have a crystal ball panel, but do you have any thoughts? And maybe Chen, from a true, boots on the ground position, what are you thinking when you think about yourself fundraising for the next year?
Frankly, I'm thinking about flexibility. I think it's such an uncomfortable space to be in, to not have a plan for the future that we know we can implement. And so I'm trying to be flexible. I'm trying to have my goals and my ideas of how I'd like to proceed, and then have some contingency plans in the event that the timing doesn't seem appropriate. And I feel like that is probably the very best I can do at this point, is strive for exactly what we're hoping for and be flexible if it seems as though we need to readjust. I do think, as we're going through this panel and talking, one of the things that I do think is interesting that is happening in this moment is the stress and the uncertainty of our world situation, I think, is creating a refocusing by people on what are their priorities. Back to that idea of what really matters to me. If you quiet down all the noise, what are the things that I am the most committed to, I feel the most strongly about? In fundraising, we talk about, you want to be one of their top 3 nonprofits that they remain committed to. And so I think about that, and I think about ways to reach that population, that when people aren't maybe reaching out in quite as wide a way, how can I be the person that they do reach out to? How can I be the person that they do want to stay engaged with? How can Salpointe remain at the forefront of their mind? But again, I just think a tremendous amount of patience and flexibility at this point, and hopefully enough of a financial cushion that we aren't in a situation of panic here at Salpointe. And that's sort of how I'm proceeding at this juncture.
Okay, wonderful. Kevin and Carlyn, I think I'm going to take this opportunity, as we're all coming to kind of a realization that it is about this athletic listening, being flexible, to say, what are your final thoughts for the audience?
I will just build upon a little bit with specific to our side of the equation, which is helping nonprofits plan for and or manage. We're going to have to look at it a little bit different. And the crystal ball that I see is those of us that have been in the past a little bit more concerned with our engagement with shaking hands and being in public places and being a little bit more leery of our exposure to germs and cleanliness. I think that's going to increase. I think people that have genuinely had an inclination towards that are going to double down on it now, and that we as consultants are going to need to be able to communicate with people more over the phone or video conferencing, and really get good at reading people that way and discerning what their interests are without being there face to face with them. And for as long as I've been doing this, it's going to be a lift for me personally. I've got kids that are so accustomed to walking around and talking with their buddies on their phone or when they're in their FaceTime. I don't know that world, but I'm going to have to learn it, because I think in the future we're going to have to do a lot more interacting on our side as consultants that way. And I think that's also nonprofits are going to find themselves, you all are used to going and having lunch and dinner and conversations and socializing, and many of your special events have been canceled, and many of you are just grouped together being a community are on the sideline right now. So how are you still going to keep that community going? People want that interaction, and we have that ability. with these video conferences, and we just need to build on it. We need to start utilizing those tools more.
And along those same lines, you, as the nonprofit fundraising professional, are going to have to be innovative and test a lot of new ideas and messages and channels and just see what works. You may have been in your role for several years and you've had the same general 4 direct mail appeals that are timed after one of your big special events, and they just are a well-oiled machine now, and that machine may have a few cogs that go missing in the wheel now. And so you'll just have to get a little bit more innovative and unfortunately a little uncomfortable as we just refocus and see what works in the coming years. But I said it before with the question about the board members, and I'll say it again, remember your why and the reasons why you got into that role in the first place, because I think that will help keep your passion alive and keep you going forward during these uncertain and having to be innovative times.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Jen, any final thoughts from you?
You know, I feel a little bit like a broken record, but I really am just trying to be a resource to people and be a support to our constituents. Again, we're a little bit different in that our families' lives are very, very much tied up in this place on a daily basis. And so I'm trying to be very, very responsive to our community in an effort to keep our strength going and keep them excited about who we are and what we do, so that when the moment arises that charitable giving is something that becomes a little bit easier to ask for, we're poised and ready for it.
Okay, wonderful. I know that some of you have asked questions. I'm going to hand them over to Kevin and Carlyn at campaignCouncil.org, and I think actually 1 or 2 might be good for you, Jen. I do want to thank you all so very much for joining us today. It's been incredibly meaningful, and I know that I've had some really great conversations with nonprofits over the last couple of weeks. I think the thing that you should take away from this is to be nimble and to listen, and we will all get through this, most certainly. It will take some time, but you know, being transparent, communicating your value, being an athletic listener, these are the things to do. So I very much want to thank our panelists today, campaignCouncil.org, Kevin and Carlyn, and I want to thank Jen from Salpointe High School in Tucson, Arizona. And I want to thank you for listening and for being a part of this and for sharing your questions and comments with us. This will be sent out. It's being recorded and it will be sent out to you shortly. With that, we'll say goodbye. Have a wonderful day. Thank you so much again. Goodbye.